Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, man, this is gonna be the easiest and most difficult video to make simultaneously. As the title suggests, The Downfall of One Piece Part 1. This is a response video to Dritz the Theorist, who was a prominent member of the One Piece community, made a 6-hour Part 1 response about essentially why he does not like the series, with the overall premise being why One Piece has fallen. Needless to say, I disagree. I think the most difficult thing about responding to this is sort of cutting through the fluff. What is necessary to respond to and what's not. Being 6 hours, it's incredibly difficult to do so thoroughly. Even more than that, considering the additional parts. I find this to be true in a lot of debates with Dritz, but there's a tendency to focus on things that are not important and kind of miss the point, which I'll try my very best not to do. I suppose the best format would be like a stream where you just watch the video and then comment, but I'm worried about what I might say or how I might say certain things in that format. Also, I don't particularly like streaming anyway. But I do want to respond to this video because quite a few people agree with him about certain things, and I really have tried to avoid this conversation for a long time. But it's time for me to step into the ring. So what are my problems with this video? Well, it starts off within the first couple minutes, its premise. And this is, I think, the most important issue I have with the video more than anything else. I'll let Dritz explain.
Greetings and welcome. I consider myself to have been a big fan of the series, but as you can no doubt tell from the title, the underlying tone of this video is quite critical, and perhaps that leads you to question why someone who thinks of themselves as a fan of the series would then create a video with such an aggressive message. It is because of my feelings towards the series that I chose to do this, and I'll go into that in a bit more depth. But first I want to present what I'll be arguing for as the thesis of this series. A decline which stems from numerous writing issues, resulting in making One Piece seem like a shell of its former self. There are a lot of factors at play that are leading One Piece down this road of self-destruction, a disease that's slowly eating away at its metaphorical body. And if it's left unchecked, I think it will bleed over into the series ending and ultimately ruin the hard work, effort, and care that is being provided by those who work on it. I think it will be impossible to look at One Piece in a positive light critically without separating it into sections and adding asterisks to its legacy. This video is going to be an exploration into what I perceive to be the downfall of One Piece.
So to paraphrase this as quickly as I can, Dritz essentially has created this video as an argument for why One Piece has been on a continuous decline since the time skip. The purpose of this, and this is important within the premise or thesis, the purpose of this is to prevent these flaws from affecting its end. Dritz has chosen to argue from this standpoint that he was a huge fan, and the reason why he made this video is to help prevent Oda and the people that work on One Piece from destroying the thing that they have worked so hard at creating. And so there's some important assumptions in this premise that Dritz doesn't enumerate but exist. Because for his video to actually have the purpose that it is designed to, some things have to happen. His video's message has to reach the creators of One Piece, one way or another. And so how exactly is this feasible or possible? This is important when thinking about the video, right? You made the video, okay, how do I create the desired effect? Well, first off, the creators of One Piece or people associated with Oda have to watch the video. Is that likely? No, but it's theoretically possible. The second option, and the more likely outcome, is Dritz hopes to convince everybody of his opinions about One Piece so that they don't need to watch his video in order to get these opinions. They're simply spread by everybody. And I gather that Dritz understands that this is the more likely pathway simply by the efforts, the lengths at which he went to argue why his opinion matters. It isn't really designed as a direct message to the creators at all. Not that I think that that's much better. If that were the case, Dritz could focus on the story and his issues with it. Instead, quite a hefty chunk of the beginning of the video is focused on Dritz himself. That's not for the creators, that's for you. So that he can convince you of his opinion by arguing his own personal expertise. And so then, facing the onslaught of criticism and hatred and anger and rabbling from fans, Dritz hopes to manipulate the creators of One Piece and Oda to do better, in his opinion. Broken down to its most base level, the idea is to light a fire under Oda and others' butts so that they create a story that Dritz likes better. If they can't do it themselves, let's make them so miserable and so desperate that they're forced to, being surrounded by this onslaught of negativity. Ignoring the narcissism and arrogance in all of this, I think it's just generally a messed up thing to do. If the video had been made instead on like moral or ethical grounds, such as the messaging in One Piece is dangerous to humankind or some such thing like that, I think that something like this would be a little bit more tolerable. But it all really boils down to Dritz having the story that he wants, totally ignoring the possibility that this is not what other people want, nor what the actual creators want. Within the video's premise is sort of an implicit, unsaid thing, that to simply get what Dritz wants, he is willing to and intentionally trying to inflict pain and suffering onto other innocent human beings. People who are just trying to tell the story that they want to tell, in the way that they want to tell it. The level of self-centeredness and selfishness in this is appalling. I would have much preferred if this premise was sort of excluded from the video, where Dritz seems compelled to argue why the video matters. He's got to save the ending, because in that premise is a call to action. Dritz isn't simply arguing his opinion anymore. He is telling you that you should be arguing the same opinion because it is important. Because to not do this could have disastrous outcomes. For me at this point, you have already crossed a line. You are encouraging other people to pick up pitchforks in the most manipulative way I could imagine, so that you have the ending that you want. What? I can be pretty self-righteous, but I am definitely equaled in this moment. And he spends a little bit arguing about, well, I don't want the creators to have wasted all of their effort. Man, take a step back, please. Come on, man. To me, this argues more, reads more, or listens more as an attempt to further justify your opinion in the making of your video. It has some grand purpose. As you suggest, why would anybody make such a video? Well, insert grand purpose. But in actuality, you have done more to harm your argument and your character by approaching it this way. Because I think that it is fairly evident just how selfish it is. To even for a moment presume that you have the best interests of the creators while instigating people to self-righteously pick up pitchforks and rabble against said series and said creators is quite honestly laughably bad. So why couldn't Dritz just simply argue his opinion, right? He doesn't like it. Here are the reasons why. I suppose your guess would be as good as mine, but that alone would have made this video a million times better. But for those of you who still don't get this, maybe from a different perspective, it would make more sense. Like for instance, me as a YouTuber, I can make a video criticizing another YouTuber's channel and why I don't like it. I was a big fan of gamer PewDiePie back in the day, so that could be an example. What Dritz has done here is essentially the same as arguing that not only does he dislike PewDiePie's newer drama and or news-related videos, but that these videos stain PewDiePie's legacy. That he is undoing his years of hard work. And Dritz, who cares more about PewDiePie than anybody else, also understands PewDiePie more than PewDiePie understands himself. And so he has taken it upon himself to do what nobody else dares do, and is willing to point out the objective reasons as for why PewDiePie is destroying himself. Maybe this comparison makes my point clearer. PewDiePie is free to do whatever the hell he wants, assuming that his messaging isn't hurting anybody. You are not entitled to the content that you want, what you obtain without spending a dime. Just as PewDiePie isn't entitled to your view. If you want to say why you don't like it, that's fair and accepted. If you want to argue why everyone should feel the same way, including the dude himself, the ground becomes murkier. But I suppose I will segue from this into my next issue, which is kind of fundamental to the video. Arguing your opinion versus arguing the truth.
Back in the day, like I said, I used to be a very vocal defender of Whole Cake Island for the first half of its runtime. I would be out in the metaphorical streets talking to people about how good I thought the future of the story was going to be. I would preach about all of the various plans Oda had up his sleeve. Plans that I thought were a given because in my ignorance, I presumed Oda was going to do exactly what I thought was the best route for the story. The mastery that I had dreamed of happening never came to be. When the reality of what Whole Cake Island was dawned on me, I found myself smote upon the mountainside trying to catch my breath like Gandalf. I was simply dumbfounded. For the first time in Whole Cake Island, I seriously began to question Oda, and I was left debating myself whether it was his fault or my own fault for having expectations and standards of what I thought the series was supposed to deliver. I had come to the conclusion at the time that as much as I would have loved to have blamed myself for being stupid and biased, I believed it to be more the case that the story had issues, and that these issues were a fact. Not everyone has an advanced knowledge of storytelling to be able to explain things down to the very finest detail.
I think that a thing that Dritz lacks in spades is respect. And I think that a lacking element in this video, which should be required for many reasons, is respect. Within this little bit of time that I've clipped here, Dritz essentially implies, right, that he is the expert. He is the master. He understands storytelling better, which is a thing so arrogant it actually makes me mad. If Dritz made a video talking about my channel and how it could be improved, right, I think that there's a lot of merit in that, because Dritz understands what goes into creating a YouTube video, particularly about One Piece, namely because he has done the very same thing. But the conversation becomes very different when you're talking about storytelling or you're talking about creating a manga. Because as far as I know, Dritz has done neither. Dritz's source of expertise on this subject comes from consuming various stories across different medium. And so from this source of experience, he feels confident in his proclamation of understanding expertise and mastery, to the point of being willing to manipulate and influence a fandom to turn against the story, so that the ending is saved. Surely I don't have to argue any further why this is probably a bad idea, and why it may be difficult for many people, including myself, to take somebody who believes this seriously. At the very least, if you want to be taken seriously by people like me, you need to treat the person that you are criticizing, the person who has truly earned it, you need to treat them with respect and account for the possibility that they may know more than you, because that is far more likely. Objectively, far more likely. This is the equivalent of somebody who eats food proclaiming to be a master chef, which in fact does happen, but that's a conversation for another day. Actually, let's turn the heat up on this a little bit. This is like somebody who listens to music and proclaims to be a master musician. Whether you acknowledge this or not, you are trying to suggest that you should, can, and are providing insights to a master of something that they have not already considered. Come on, man. People who do this, I presume, do this because they want their opinion to matter more than is deserving, more than they have actually earned. When Gordon Ramsay comes into a restaurant and critiques how a restaurateur operates or the food that they make, it tends to have more weight because Gordon Ramsay has actually done it. Now, the restaurant might end up being a carbon copy of Gordon Ramsay, and he might actually be stifling creativity, and his opinion isn't necessarily right, but certainly his advice should be listened to. Although I find it very noteworthy that the premise of, like Hell's Kitchen, for instance, Gordon looks for people who are actively failing, right? Gordon offers his harsh opinions about the restaurant, how it operates, everything, because they need that opinion or else. Which is kind of similar to what Dritz has done with his video, or attempted to do. Would anyone actually dream of attempting to talk down to Gordon Ramsay to tell him how to better run a restaurant? The premise is so laughably absurd. At the very least, if you actually want to be taken seriously to some extent, your opinions have to be established as opinions, not as truth or facts. Like, for instance, I could visit one of Gordon Ramsay's restaurants and actually have an experience there, and then I could say, it wasn't for me. I didn't like this, and this. If your opinion is similar to mine, then maybe you'll probably experience it in the same way, so I'm just letting you know. And something like that will absolutely fly and takes place all the time. It becomes wildly different, argued in the way that you have.
Discussion is the gateway to understanding one another. And in argumentative topics like literature, it's even more important to hash things out because there is an inherent tension created just from talking about it.
Dritz, what you have failed to understand all these years is there is not an inherent tension in talking about different opinions. There is inherent tension from the way that you talk about your opinions. And to a lesser and equal extent for you personally, from the expectations others have for your opinion because of your dramatic shift, which you talk about in the video. This all contributes to your perception of tension. If everything that you said was prefaced with, this is my experience, this is my opinion, I didn't like this personally, people may not agree with you, but all tension is lost. I feel this is important to say because, again, after all these years, it doesn't seem as though you understand this. I can make a tweet right now, and I could say, I don't like Dragon Ball. People might ask why, but they aren't going to be mad. I could then explain why very, very specifically. And as long as I have prefaced it with, this is my experience, this is my opinion, they will continue to not be mad. They'll shrug their shoulders and move on. You have warped your own reality and perspective by facilitating toxicity. Because from very near the beginning, you've always felt compelled to argue why your opinion is the truth. Just so you know.
Bad conversation isn't good for anyone.
So I'm going to turn your advice against you, Dritz. The ultimate source of all of this is your lack of respect. Not only to One Piece, but people who hold differing opinions to your own. And so I'm not saying that you are alone or that you are the only person who does this, but an interesting fact about this is that it only comes up when somebody is criticizing. You could say, oh no, well, people act this way when about things that they love, defending what they love. But I think the reality is that when this comes about, right? When you say, I don't like One Piece because of this reason, and someone comes at you and say, no, you're wrong, these are objective reasons why the thing is good, they're criticizing you as a person. You idiot. How can you not see this? And it's around this point that it really starts to spiral. Now, of course, there are people that are just agents of chaos who are just looking to troll and inspire anger and whatnot, but I find that the source of the most honest toxicity, if we can call it that, is criticism. Disrespectful criticism framed as the truth. From people who neither understand nor tolerate other people's opinions. Now, when you're talking about like social or political issues where there is legitimate reason to believe in self-righteousness for the betterment of yourself or others, right, this becomes a very complex topic. But when you're talking about which anime you like or which story you like, it's really not. The world would be a much better place if you just simply let people have their opinions, instead of trying to argue your opinion to be more than it actually is. Like, I've gone on record saying that I am not a huge fan of Dragon Ball Super. There was many people who like Dragon Ball Super, and I can enumerate the reasons why I don't like it. But you know what else I could do? I could also argue why it was successful and why other people like it. Because regardless of the reasons whether I like it or not, there are reasons why people do. And within this is the essence of opinion and subjective experience. Other people value other things differently to myself. The moment that I say that my opinion is the truth, the objective truth, and other people should feel the same way as I do, or if I imply this, that is the moment that it becomes bad conversation. The moment I try to argue that what I value matters more than what other people value, it becomes bad conversation, which for me personally was very frustrating to listen to.
And hopefully you know the dark reality when it comes to criticism versus praise, and how differently they are seen and handled. It takes a lot more effort to justify criticizing something than it does to praise it. When you are in the act of praising, people don't usually ask for an argument as to why you like something. It's just accepted at face value.
I'm just over here thinking about what it is that I do on YouTube. Do you guys take my experience at something when I say I like it? Do you take it at face value? Is that why you're here? I feel like people wait with bated breath for Tekking's review to see just how hyped he'll be about a thing and how he'll explain why he's hyped. That's how I understand it, at the very least.
They will say, "Oh, he liked it? Hey man, I like it too. Peak fiction gang gang." You are welcomed and embraced into the online family with very little trouble as long as you say the magic, ego-inducing words of positivity. The same cannot be said for the opposite end of this though. When you say something confrontational like, "I didn't like it?" ? People will want to know why, and then they'll start asking questions.
I just wanted you to get the full dose of this, because the dark reality of criticism versus praise is that when you praise something, people don't ask questions, but when you criticize it, they ask why. I hope that you guys get the sense of just how truly horrid life is.
And you, who said the negative things, will need to explain yourself and explain yourself good. Because if you don't do a good job in explaining yourself, your opinion and feelings will be judged as worthless by the people who don't believe in the same things you do.
So I would like to restate all of this. When you praise something, people don't ask questions, they just simply understand because of their own experience. When you criticize something, people ask questions. Which, by the way, isn't true if they agree with your criticism or agree with your opinion about a thing negatively. Because everybody projects their own experiences onto other people. So when opinions agree, their reason becomes your reason, which is why no explanation is needed. But when you state your opinion that people do not agree with, they then ask questions such as why, which necessitates answers such as the reasons. And the reasons better be good or your worthiness gets judged. This is Dritt's highly specific perspective. I think here, Dritz is sort of suggesting at what is a primary compulsion for him. I can't speak for him, he can offer his own 2 cents, but it is apparent from the statement that Dritz highly values other people's opinion of his opinion. He doesn't like feeling as though his opinion is worthless, or he doesn't like having the impression that other people view his opinion as worthless. Which would certainly explain the lengths at which he's gone to in order to justify said opinion. Now, truthfully, I think that this is omnipresent for the vast majority of people that interact on the internet. I actually find that the people who would value this least would probably not talk at all, and would instead read other people's opinions rather than stating their own. But I find that Dritz is kind of disingenuous by not indicating that this is a significant draw for him. This is very clearly his experience because this is how he chose to phrase it. When people don't see eye to eye with my opinions, I perceive them to think less of me as a person, which is why my argument has to be good. And I just want to state here, for Dritz and for others, it really doesn't work this way. I mean, it does work this way if you try to argue your opinion as objective fact, then your character and your worthiness is certainly judged because of your arrogance. But if you're just throwing your innocent opinion out into the vacuum, people don't care. We just don't care. You're trying to make people care at your own detriment. Again, more good would have been accomplished if you just essentially owned it. Instead, he chooses to frame the video as for the greater good, insert some grand purpose, rather than for Dritz's own self-satisfaction of being understood and his opinion valued. This was another thing that rubbed me the wrong way. Like, for me, my perspective is if Dritz had started the video basically saying, for 3 years, I have been the source of an enormous amount of drama and hatred within the One Piece community, and I have to make this video just so that I'm understood. I'm not trying to convince you of my opinion, but I want you to hear me out and listen to the things that I say because I want to be understood. Then the video would have been far better received, just on that alone.
When it comes to objectivity versus subjectivity, I would say there is an ongoing battle between these ideas and how they fit into the realm of literature and art. I've seen many people lift up the mantle and proclaim that art cannot be objectively good or bad. Everything is equal but different at the same time. Everyone has different feelings and beliefs, so how good something may be is in the eye of the beholder. A child's stick figure drawing of their mom and dad could be viewed in the same light and in greater lights than critically acclaimed masterpieces or works of art because the value of this drawing is just an opinion. The parents of this theoretical child hold a much deeper emotional connection to each other than something hanging up in a museum somewhere. And that's a fair thing to say, right? That is fair. In that specific scenario, it's easy to understand little details like that to see how people feel. There's nothing wrong with it either. But when you have an example like that and take it to the most extreme level by applying it to the entire medium, it can lead down a very dangerous path.
I enjoyed everything that Dritz had to say in this section because objectivity versus subjectivity is incredibly crucial to this conversation. But my first issue with this is the very end, where he begins to argue why it is important that things be considered with an objective lens, when those standards are in consideration for placement upon the genre itself. That subjectivity is all fine and well, right, and in a happy vacuum, it's cool, but there comes a point in time where you have to be objective, and you have to define what objective means, because of insert dangerous consequences. But you didn't actually explain what these consequences would be. Or maybe you did.
You cannot believe an apple is a banana and then tell me that I should believe an apple is a banana without proving that's the case. Truth is something that's discovered, fought over, and won. Anything that could be considered an art form, whether it's a story, poem, painting, sculpture, or whatever, requires skill and practice in order to master. There is a certain logic at play so that things can be compared and contrasted against each other to find out what works and what doesn't work. Surely you can see that there are technical differences between that and higher level drawings. If there was truly no skill gap in the arts, then the arts themselves would not exist, and human nature itself would be completely different. Because if we couldn't strive to be better at something, we would lose meaning in life. Regardless of the artistic medium, there is a methodology at play that goes beyond something as simple as your preference in what you like. If there was no objectivity in art, then people wouldn't have the right to praise anything, and we would all live in a bottomless void of nothing.
I just want to pause here for a moment, get this out of my system. You can absolutely still praise something without there being an objective truth because you have your own subjective experience and feelings. You're not disallowed from praise. That's utter nonsense.
If you start to compare or dissect works of art, it becomes increasingly more important to have conversation, to formulate arguments, to mount evidence so that everyone can get to the bottom of something or at the very least start a dialogue. That's how we progress as a race.
I felt like here he was very much less clear about his opinions regarding a thing which even he said was like vitally important. I was left feeling like I was watching my own videos, right? Where like a thing is said and then you find out why it's important 5 minutes later. However, when you really dig into it, what this man is saying is that he is saving art with objective criticism. He is saving humanity. Because without this, life has no meaning. And the human race cannot grow. Which in my opinion is a pretty bold statement. Not least of which because of the importance that Drizzt places upon himself and his role within this. I'm certain he believes it, but I do think it would be difficult to sell, which is why it felt like it was kind of skipped over. When you take his argument in its entirety, it's basically subjectivity is all fine and good and you can have your own experience and that makes sense conceptually, but things are actually better or worse, and if we don't pursue these things, then humanity's growth is stunted. Which is just like, wow. And I guess why this doubly doesn't work for me is like, you're kind of taking it upon yourself to establish a thing like, again, grand purpose, but your energy is very limited to one piece. So it comes off as disingenuous because you got skin in the game. Like if you truly think that objective criticism is necessary and lacking in order to save art or some such BS, there's many other shows that you would think would be as equally important to criticize. But you don't carry that same energy. Or is this like the future of the channel that you hinted at? If so, please consider the things that I'm saying in this video as constructive feedback. Because as you said, not all conversation is good conversation, and a lot of this is bad. So I'm certainly not sold or certain at this point that you're the right person to sort of lead the charge and lead the discussion. All this seems to center around Drizzt's perception that criticism is not allowed. And his perception of this is based almost entirely on his experience from the way that he is criticized. And so from this jumping off point, he now believes himself to be the savior of art, manning the fort nobody else will. So I just want to make sure that I'm very, very clear here. Criticism is allowed. Certainly it's allowed. Within One Piece, for sure. I criticize on my channel constantly. I offer my opinion on literally everything. And certainly I might have a hiccup every now and again, but the base reason why my criticism is taken better than yours is because the way that I criticize, or if you're not looking at me, you're looking at other people who have successfully criticized, the same is true. It needs to be approached with an air of fallibility, which you seem for one reason or another very reluctant to allow. Insert tension that you experience constantly. In the meantime, there are some seriously fundamental things that I am not sure that he understands. He looks at something like skill as very black and white, something provable and quantifiable. And so this is theoretically true. However, his example is highly misleading when he shows a picture of a stick figure and then a professional mangaka, right? That's very extreme. But in some cases, he almost undermines himself. Because the conversation here that he avoided and or wasn't aware of is the criteria for which we evaluate. So we can take the same stick figure and then the panel, beautiful panel drawn by Oda, and instead change the challenge, right? Which artist can produce a completed piece in under an hour? Now, it is true that I don't know exactly how long it took Oda to draw this, but hypothetically, right, Oda loses. Because implicit within this challenge is an evaluation of skill. There's criteria. You have to complete your piece in under an hour. Without having done this, you fail. Now, if Oda actually attempted to compete in this challenge, he might beat the stick figure, but he certainly wouldn't beat his own artwork made in the One Piece panel, I would think. If that doesn't work, make it a 10-minute challenge. I hope you guys can understand what I'm saying. If you have a push-up contest and a one-armed man competes, the standards at which you evaluate his performance would be different than somebody with two arms. Just the same as it's very compelling in, for instance, singing competitions when children compete and show skill beyond their years. You don't need to explain this to people. They intuitively understand that, whoa, that kid is really good, even if they aren't as good as professional adults. What Dritz is arguing here undermines this element of criteria, and that simply isn't reality. Dritz is in fact arguing from his own subjective experience because he personally doesn't value, for instance, the kid singing in the singing contest. This is something that I've tried to explain to Dritz for many years. Weekly manga is one of the most challenging formats that exist, particularly when it comes to pure storytelling. The way that we judge speed art that is completed in 10 minutes is wildly different than pieces of artwork that take many years to complete. When evaluating for skill, it really depends on if you value the differing skills, and whether or not you value it is a very personal, subjective experience. The example that I like to use is fantasy novels, and a story that is shared between the two of us that we both enjoy is the Stormlight Archive, written by Brandon Sanderson. Now, Dritz evaluates these stories on the same scale. Whether it be One Piece or Stormlight or anything else, he lumps them all together. There is pure storytelling perfection that everyone should strive for, and that is what matters most. There are objective criteria and definable structure which improves a story's effectiveness, I guess. But the process of creation and the criteria are wildly different. And I think that the reality of this is quite self-evident if you even attempted to make a manga, a weekly manga in particular. Brandon Sanderson goes through at least 5 drafts before the story is published for anybody other than insiders to read. There are several stages present here that aren't present in manga. First off, Brandon completes the whole story, the whole arc in one go. He then improves it to the best of his capabilities. He then sends it to alpha readers or other professional authors in order to evaluate it. He then changes the story based on these recommendations. He then sends it to beta readers or actual fans to get their perspective and feelings on it. He then makes changes once more. He might send it to beta readers again until he feels like the book is absolutely perfected from a pure storytelling standpoint, based on the things that he wants to accomplish and his own standards. And then someone like you or I have the opportunity to read it, and he does not have to draw anything. And we are talking about one of the best fantasy authors ever. Weekly manga does not function in this way. In fact, manga does not function in this way. Unfortunately, mangaka do not get to erase their story. They have to continuously maintain consistency and internal logic, characterizations, all the things that Dritz prioritizes, which is a monumental feat. Monumental. The level of difficulty is many-fold higher. Very, very few humans on this planet are capable of following the standards of the genre. So while Dritz holds his own standards and expectations for the genre up on a very, very high pedestal, an element of reality needs to be kept in mind. You are criticizing one of the very best to ever do it, and he is still not good enough for you. There comes a point where you need to recognize that some things, your standards, your expectations are just too high. They can't be met, which is what many people, including myself, value more. When we are reading manga, this is important to understand. When you're reading manga, and especially if you compare it to something like novels, it is very close to, if not essentially, a rough draft. So when you're evaluating the merit of the story and the skill of the people that are making it, this is important. What Dritz is essentially arguing, whether he is aware of this or not, is that things that take longer to create are better, objectively. And the reason that he believes that this is objective is because he does not value the constraints these artists are put under. Because I personally believe that he would rather these constraints not exist, because they take away from what Dritz cares about most. The conversation boils down to the skills that you value, which is entirely subjective. He's in fact arguing his subjective experience objectively, because the only thing that matters to Dritz is his own experience and nobody else's.
People can be better than others at things. We know this.
But let's try this from another angle because this is an important conversation. The example that Dritz actually provided as he said this is most illuminating. We know that people are better or worse than something as he shows boxing. But once again, the assumption that he makes that I'm not sure that he's aware of is the criteria for which we evaluate winning. It's actually arbitrary in many cases. Like you can point at a picture and say this person is better or worse, but what about weight classes? How would you objectively define that? This is actually a pretty prevalent conversation in boxing when you have someone like Floyd Mayweather, who didn't have a lot of KOs. He won the points game. Is he the actual best boxer of all time, or was he just the best given the rules of the game which were arbitrarily selected? This same thing is true across all sports, where rules of the game subtly change which favor certain players over others. I'm not saying that I'm a proponent of this, but a conversation can be made that in today's NBA, a player like Shaquille O'Neal wouldn't be successful. Certainly not to the level that he was in his Hall of Fame career. Would he be any less of a great basketball player under these circumstances? It's perception. So to reach a point here, I don't think that it is productive. I don't think that it is good conversation when you try to argue that what other people value is not valuable, because value is intrinsic to each person, which is ironically fundamental to the story of One Piece. He's like Buggy trying to argue to Luffy that gold is objectively more valuable than whatever the hell Straw Hat Luffy cares about. Dritz very, very clearly values his own perception, which we'll talk about eventually, of internal consistency and logic, characterization, these things. But you could look at something like Harry Potter, right? The best-selling book of all time. If you actually look within each book, J.K. Rowling does a pretty good job of maintaining logic and consistency. But when you look from book to book, from 1 to 2 to 2 to 3 and on throughout the series, she does a pretty terrible job of doing this. And people don't care. They didn't care because they value different things. And I think the conversation becomes even clearer when you focus on other forms of art, such as music, right? There's like actual skill involved in making music. Some music takes more skill than others, and this could be defined as, the number of people actually capable of producing the piece of music. But at the end of the day, all that really matters is how you feel, your experience with it. To suggest for even a moment that humanity has lost something because you enjoy something that might require less skill than something else is head-poundingly annoying. A lot of you don't realize this, but he's basically ripping all the music that most everyone here likes, tearing it to absolute shreds by implication. But if you sit down and think about the things that I said, and I could go on for a very long time and provide a countless number of examples to try and argue my point, but this video cannot go on forever. But if you keep this in mind, then every single one of Dritz's examples, the way that I will address them will be almost exactly the same. Stop trying to tell me that what you value is better than what I value. Stop trying to argue your subjective experience and opinion objectively.
You are entitled to like whatever you want. Just because I'm making this video about One Piece and I'm going to be saying things that I think are bad about it, doesn't mean that I think you shouldn't read One Piece and feel bad about doing so. Preferences exist and everyone has them. Not everything you like is required to be of some objectively high quality so you can fit in with these self-proclaimed cool kids.
But just know, your taste is trash, and I would know because I am an expert. Just thought I'd add that because it's kind of omitted.
Humans are a fictitious bunch that rely on power structure and gossip, so it's often the case that people feel the need to validate themselves by thinking that everything they are associated with is good. The sooner you get rid of this feeling, the better you'll be as a person.
This was advice that you sorely needed to heed yourself, without the bit about improving yourself as a person. The reason that you're okay with bringing up ecchi anime as an example of when your taste can be bad is because you don't associate your identity with those anime. However, when it comes to Berserk and when it comes to One Piece, it is very important that you argue your truth. By arguing these truths, you are validating yourself, or attempting to. This isn't about fitting in with the cool kids, this is about making yourself the cool kid, with the objective superior taste.
People who are proponents of universal subjectivity don't really believe it and stand by it. It's simply a convenience, a defense mechanism that's used when it comes to something that they personally like that is being attacked, or ants on something. Happens all the time.
First off, this point is not substantiated. You're just sort of saying it, and there's no evidence or proof that what you're saying is true, which makes it not very persuasive. Secondly, I can sit here and defend many things that I do not like from a subjective experience, based solely on understanding why other people like them, by taking the time to understand and learn what they value, and how a thing might appeal to those values. Basically, my experience and my preference are not the center of the universe.
To deny that stories follow logic and structure in order to create quality is to deny everything that you actually love and appreciate about the stories.
But who determines which structure is superior? You? Are we going by sales? What is the actual quantifiable metric? I can argue this any which way, but I wish you had been more specific. Of course, this is when you'll say, well, this is where the discussion matters. But the discussion doesn't matter. It only matters if you want to validate your tastes as superior, because your tastes and other people's opinions of your taste is crucial to your identity. This is about the time that the point previously about how taste is important to humankind becomes very crucial to his argument. You have to buy that to sort of buy this, and I don't. We're already at 42 minutes, but I just want to say this now. I might have said this earlier. But all of this would have been more tolerable if you had simply added, in my opinion, just a simple caveat to almost essentially everything that you said would have made your criticism good conversation. Because you aren't telling other people what they should value, you're explaining what you value. And no one can take that away from you. Just the same as you can't take that away from anybody else. Not me, not anyone. Let me repeat this again for emphasis. You can argue for what you value, but you cannot take away or diminish the things other people value, under the guise of what objectively matters most to you.
The word nitpick is a phrase often used to belittle and devalue complaints. In an ideal situation, a nitpick is the act of singling out a tiny mistake or mistakes in an overwhelmingly positive experience. The declaration of a statement being a nitpick is to acknowledge that what was said is correct. When an individual calls something a nitpick, they aren't disagreeing, they are simply saying it's not a big deal. So the difference between what is considered a nitpick and a genuinely large error is determined by how severe the impact of the mistake is. In other words, context matters.
And in other words, subjective experience matters. Look, full disclosure, you can judge me if you like to, I don't like tomatoes. If I went to a restaurant and ordered a meal, not knowing that there was tomatoes within the dish, and I got it and there was tomatoes, it would potentially ruin the entire dish for me. But somebody else might eat the same thing and recognize that, hey, I understand why you don't like tomatoes. I can see the logic behind the thought. Maybe the person is of the same opinion. He also is not a big fan of tomatoes. But to him, it could still be a nitpick because he still enjoyed the thing. The idea of a nitpick is essentially, I see the thing that you were saying, but it didn't matter to me. And you don't seem to agree with this because you are hell-bent on arguing why everyone should care about tomatoes in their dishes, while refusing to accept the subjectivity in your preference.
A nitpick is only as strong as what it's taking away from or how many of them there are.
A nitpick is only as strong as how it personally affects the thing that you are consuming for you. You can stack up as many inconsequential nitpicks as you like, but if people don't care about these things. You cannot force them to. Stop trying.
I think there are substantial issues, and if you are someone who is watching this video and will decide that what I say is in fact a nitpick, then I would absolutely love for you to substantiate that thought with evidence so that I can figure out where I went wrong, because at the bottom of all of this video, I'm trying to get better just like everybody else.
Man, I sure wish this was the energy of the entire video. Maybe that was your intention, but you failed. And as I have noted, that failure was significant.
Out of everything that is normally said to me, right up there with nitpicks, this is probably the most repeated comment that I see. People say that if I don't like where the current story is, then I should just drop it. Don't read. It's better to only do things you like rather than to suffer, after all.
So I do understand your perspective on this, and, I've thought a lot about it. I've never actually, I think, directly told you to drop it. I might have, but certainly it's been a thought that's been in my brain. But I would say that more important than anything else is find the way in which you can experience One Piece to its fullest, without being a black hole of toxicity, which is what you are criticized most for and how you negatively impact a lot of other people. And I've told you this at length, but I think that it would be very valuable to you to binge One Piece rather than read weekly. I certainly think that it's worth a try, and the attempt at it would be one of the more selfless things you could do for other people, and simultaneously potentially for yourself. But I don't know how much I want to actually talk about this, but I guess what I want to communicate here without going on and on and on forever is that I think that the weekly experience negatively affects a lot of people's enjoyment of One Piece. It is a very common experience to essentially enjoy One Piece as a totally positive experience, and then you catch up weekly, and then everything that was positive suddenly starts to crack. This occurs for many reasons. Dritz, for instance, lasted about a half an arc, and his story is not uncommon. And it really doesn't matter which arc it is. Once you catch up, catching up weeds a lot of fans out. But just to throw like an interesting point in here for discussion for people to think about, consider what you are willing to forgive when the highs meet your expectations. Think back to all the things that you loved as a child. Maybe you even love now that give you a moment that is just wow. And then take the time to learn or consider the various things which you might consider to be nitpicks that didn't matter to you, in part because that one moment was wow. A really great YouTuber by the name of Daniel Green, who is a booktuber, fantasy booktuber, who's catching up to One Piece and reviewing each arc, he recently caught up to Dressrosa, and his experience, it illustrates my point to an extent. I was obviously there reading Dressrosa weekly, and so I was present for a lot of the conversation that surrounded Dressrosa, which had a ton of nitpicks. I would say that Dressrosa was ruined for me by reading weekly. I still enjoyed it, but it was one of my least favorite arcs of One Piece for how long it dragged on and the various things the conversation which surrounded it. But when Daniel Green reviewed this, and he's reviewed all of these arcs honestly, including things that he didn't like or arcs that he straight up didn't like, he could not stop gushing about the things that he loved from Dressrosa, which is what pretty much all the newer fans of One Piece, the people that have recently caught up, say about Dressrosa. Yeah, Sabo showing up was a little bit whack, not sure if that makes sense. The Tantata weren't particularly strong elements of the story, neither were Rebecca really, but Gear Forth, Doflamingo, Law's flashback, these are the things that were so good that they overlooked everything else because those experiences were worthwhile. The highs were so high that the lows didn't matter. The nitpicks didn't matter because all that's important to people is how they feel about the thing. And I find it to be a very prevalent experience to slog through what is mostly an unenjoyable thing, but once you reach that payoff moment, then it's like, yeah, worthwhile. I think for a lot of people, reading weekly limits the highs of One Piece. And obviously, we're not just talking about One Piece here, we're talking about weekly manga. Another example is I'm a huge fan of My Hero Academia. I apologize for not covering the series really anymore, but My Hero Academia is still really freaking high tier for me. And so I read the villain arc and Shigaraki's backstory weekly. And so as I read that, I teared up. That was one of those very most high tier weekly experiences for me. I wasn't going to read, multiple chapters before that moment. I read the new chapter when it came out. And so recently I reread the whole arc, which is a thing that I try to do every now and again, but it's easier said than done with a lot of these really long running manga. It takes a lot of time. I read kind of slow. And so I reread the arc and I reached that moment, and it's just painfully obvious when tearing up becomes, oh my god, this is just, it's on another level. And I think that the same thing will be true in Wano. Things like Odin's moment. I teared up as I read that weekly. But that high would be so much higher for me because I am a binger by nature. That's how I would choose to read most stories if it weren't for YouTube and the community. That Odin moment is one of the very best moments in all of the story. I'm just telling you that. And I say that from experience, having read a lot of really top tier moments weekly. Knowing how those moments affected me, reading it weekly, and also knowing the lasting legacy and effect of those moments in the community and upon reread. So I feel like a lot of people don't have this perspective because the truth is that there's a lot of turnover within the community, and the majority of the fans that actively participate in discussion have recently caught up. Or have recently caught up after a period of hiatus, after having been caught up before, which is my story. But I guess the point is that I have observed, right, people not liking Impel Down, and even Marineford, if you can believe that. People didn't like Dressrosa. Now everybody who comes in the community stands Dressrosa as one of the greatest. People who didn't like Whole Cake Island, and I'm just telling you guys that Whole Cake Island's lasting legacy is going to be a masterpiece. It's just this cycle repeated over and over again. It is my opinion that where we currently are in Wano is one of the highest highs in all of One Piece, and reading weekly, a lot of people can't see it. Reading weekly is just simply not for everybody. And it all boils down to nitpicks becoming more than nitpicks, because all of a sudden the highs don't make up for the various problems that are present throughout the story. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't new problems in the New World, because there are. But this whole conversation gets tangled and confused with things that have never changed. The only thing that's changed is your perspective.
But heading back to the topic of just dropping stuff, criticism and praise have equally important roles. If people only heard what they wanted to hear, this would blind them from the truth. You need a balance in order to find it, which is a topic I think has a big role to play within One Piece's own production. I'm not saying that I am the source of truth.
You're not saying it here, but you're saying it elsewhere and implying it throughout.
What I am saying, though, is that criticism and debate are absolutely needed for progress.
This is more validation and justification through a lens of self-righteousness, which is BS.
This goes beyond any art form and expands into real life. How can you make anything better if you don't talk about it?
It's not that you can't talk about it. It's that you shouldn't talk about it disrespectfully and arrogantly. I know I'm repeating this from earlier, but I'm hoping that each time I point this out, it becomes a little clearer. The way you discuss criticisms matter. Because at the end of the day, on the other side of a criticism is a person. I'm certain that all throughout this video, right, there's little moments in which I might trigger you or people who like you simply by the way I phrase something in a disrespectful manner. Because this whole video, through One Piece or through your opinions or otherwise, is a critique of you and the thing that you have made.
There are many who say that I am not qualified to criticize or talk about the series, as odd as that may seem. And it's something that does confuse me a bit. You would not find this comment on any video in which people are theorizing or doing an analysis of a character, and that's largely because the concept of complimenting a series is therapeutic. It's like analgesic, in the sense that it will confirm the worldview that manga fans are looking for. Man inherently seeks approval.
There's a bit of untruth in this statement, as well as irony. Because this feeling that you described does not only exist in praise, it also exists in criticism. Like, let's restate this. Criticism can be therapeutic and analgesic for those that agree with it, because it confirms their worldview and what they're looking for in manga. So your implication that this is something unique to praise is misleading. It's this very same reason why there are many people who might enjoy your video, despite it containing no praise. And I think that it's also important to understand that a theorist or analysis, they aren't trying to tell Oda what to think or what to say. They are trying to understand what it is that he is saying. There's a difference here.
It is the merit of one's arguments that help determine whether their thoughts are worthy or not.
And the way in which they express this argument.
If I am not worthy to criticize One Piece, then by the same distinction, I shouldn't be worthy to praise it either, since both should be held in the same light of fairness.
It's important at this point to reiterate that criticism has consequences. Just as I make this video to you, criticism has consequences. I believe that at this point in time you have really failed to argue the consequences of praise, because your sweeping generalities and big statements are highly unjustified and mostly stated and skipped over. That the human race is lesser than in some way because of positivity and praise. The way that it actually works within society is that rather than sort of comparing and contrasting praise and criticism, it's more of a comparison of praise between various shows and or stories to determine sort of community merit. The worthiness of art within the sphere of society is mostly judged based on popularity. When something doesn't reach the standards of the community or the society, it's simply not talked about and not shared and likely not experienced. This is the truth far more often than the opposite. And this is, I guess, to like outright state it, is the kind way of approaching it. To sort of let down a creator of something, let them down easy. Like for instance, if I finish my book, and I publish it, and it just doesn't take off, right? It's like, I think that it's the greatest thing ever, and I was expecting everyone to just love it, right? And then it's just crickets afterwards. The reality slowly dawns on me. They just simply don't like it. Those that took the time to read it likely have a lot of criticisms of it that they might not share with me, but exist. And so then, the burden falls on me. If I still aspire to be a content creator or a creator of something in this kind of medium, that I seek out these people and ask for their criticisms. I need to ask for them to be brutally honest so that I can improve. This is how it is, and this is how it should be. Because criticism has consequences. Because the creator of the thing needs to be prepared and in the right mindset to learn and grow from the critiques. You cannot and should not force this upon them. Not unless you have a great humanitarian reason, which you try to include here, but I don't buy. As an example, maybe, that some people might resonate with, okay? Being overweight is a source of constant criticism from society for various reasons. It is not cool to go see somebody who is overweight in public and shame them. I think that most people understand this by now. However, if an overweight person came to you and asked for your honest opinion about it, then if you think that it is the right thing to do, you should share your criticism. Because likely at that point, they are in the right mindset to learn and grow from it. Because criticism has consequences. And the real honest truth about all of this is that usually a person won't need to ask you, because they are more aware of their own flaws and problems than you would be aware of their flaws and problems, which should be a baseline assumption in most things. Because stories are as much a part of a person's being as their own bodies, because they use them and the reception to them to evaluate their own worthiness, at least when all of their heart are poured into it, which is obviously not everything ever written, but is certainly true for a thing like One Piece. Dritz, I really hope that you understand what I'm saying here, right? The whole premise of your video is I don't want the end of One Piece to suck. So your critiques need to get to Oda. But at the same time, they have to be presented in a way that isn't harmful to the man or in a form that he is going to accept and be able to learn from. Which requires all the other things that we talked about, such as respect, kindness, cover the pill with honey. So it's with this being stated that it becomes maybe more apparent that your video is counterproductive. Certainly in the aspect of decency. It's like a debate between the philosophy of reward versus punishment. If you want the dog to do what it is that you want to, do you kick it or do you give it a treat? Are you trying to rule by merit or are you trying to rule by fear? Well, you decided that the only pathway it appears is to kick Oda and force upon him this video of unrelenting misery in order to get him to do what you want. And I've been trying to explain this to you in every conceivable way that I can, that this really bothers me. You are absolutely entitled to your opinions, but the way in which you express them has consequences. At the very least, potential ones. I wish that you would understand this because I don't want to say it. I want you to say it. Because you should know better than anyone what it feels like to be kicked, in order for other people to make you do what they want you to do. It is a universal, miserable experience, which you explain at various points in the video and still do it. And yeah, maybe I'm a hypocrite for making this video and doing more of the same. But I actually attempted to talk to you and you decided that further conversation was futile. So, hypocrite or not, at least I tried. It is my opinion that if you would like to teach a truth to somebody that you might think is important or not, but the best way to do it is to do so by focusing on positivity. Take a thing that you love and explain why you love it. Or take a thing that you love and explain why you love it and explain the reasons why you might not in the same video. And all of a sudden you'll find that everyone is a little bit more receptive to learning if what you say has merit. What seems to be really what your goal was that you were striving for, but you missed. Your strategy, on the other hand, which is no doubt noble, is more likely to be ego-inducing for you than to actually accomplish the messaging, because you are constantly offending the people that it should be important to you to convince. And you know, maybe the same thing is true of me, but what I have learned over a long experience on YouTube is that some people just simply aren't meant to argue certain things. And criticism has never been something that I've been particularly good at. And I think the same thing is true of you. But I do feel that this is worthy of saying, so I hope that I'm understood. You talk about fairness between praise and criticism. If you can have one, then by measure of fairness, you can have the other. But I believe that there are reasons why this isn't the case and shouldn't be the case. Certainly, you need to be far more careful when criticizing something than praising something. Because at the other end of the story is a real person.
But that's a perspective you have likely never heard. When I made my 43-minute Mihawk video, which was all about praising Mihawk and speculating things about his character and strength, I did not see a single peep from anybody who dislikes my negative thoughts about the series and then came to say that I shouldn't talk about Mihawk. If you needed credentials simply to have opinions and make deductions, then you would need credentials to comment on the need for credentials.
Then why the hell did you spend the first 30 minutes of your video arguing about your credentials?
People only use these arguments to express their own discomfort.
The need for credentials only really exists when you are criticizing somebody who has said credentials, ignoring moral, ethical, or political types of arguments. You can praise something and be wrong, but to go head-to-head with somebody who is truly a master of something with a wealth of earned experience, the bar raises, at the very least for people to take you seriously. But yeah guys, this covers the first hour of his 6-hour video. without addressing any one piece points at all. And I do actually want to talk about these things, but this video is already extraordinarily long, so maybe I'll break it into parts, maybe I'll talk about it somewhere. I definitely want to talk about these things, but this is like, I feel like this is the meat and bones, right? This is the thing that I want to talk about most, because your opinions can exist. Whether you like or dislike something, that is absolutely valid, and you can share that, and that doesn't bother me in the slightest. It's like this right here, which I wanted to say most. This is the thing that I feel like is unsaid and needs to be said, you know, to Dritz or to the community. It's actually really similar to my next video, if you guys remember that, where it's like, let people enjoy things. Your contrived reason for why they need to like what you like is contrived, and stop it. But yeah, guys, don't go out of your way to hate on Dritz. I'm actually for you watching the video if you would like to, and leave a comment as to your reason for why you agree with him or why you don't. I mean, that's cool. This is the second version of this video, but in the first one, I very clearly stated that there are some things from Dritz's videos that I actually do agree with. And I actually, you know, even more than that, I agree that the pre-time skip is superior to the post-time skip for some very subjective reasons that I value, that are clearly shared with other people, which at some point in time I might explain. And I have explained before, but, you know, in chapter reactions, how can you find anything? But yeah, the overarching point is that, yes, there's a thing from One Piece even that I don't like, but that is my experience, just as Dritz might not like something that I like. And I think that when you really start to argue it as truth and facts and objectivity, that's when shit hits the fan. Especially when you're trying to force people to conform to your opinions. That is a thing that does not normally end well, and has not for Dritz. But yeah, guys, as always, curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.